A significant number of events have unfolded across the globe recently, altering the geopolitical landscape. Today, we delve into some of these major developments. Stay tuned as we unpack these events and provide concluding thoughts at the end of our analysis. They once referred to it as the Atlantic Alliance, a connection forged in conflict, mutual reliance, and shared defense principles. Yet, observe more closely today. Fissures are becoming apparent. Why are allies of many years suddenly distancing themselves from Washington? Why are European leaders, formerly working in unison with the White House, now openly questioning America's standing on the global stage? This isn't merely about policy disagreements anymore. It involves apprehension, a lack of trust, and an increasing realization that Europe might need to rely on itself. From Berlin to Brussels, leaders are redefining their critical boundaries, signaling a potential paradigm shift in international relations. Before we proceed, if you appreciate deep dives into the stories behind the headlines, the subtle realignments, and the geopolitical undercurrents, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. Your support is crucial for us to continue bringing you this kind of content. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience. So, what has fundamentally altered? Let's investigate the 10 European nations that are quietly, yet undeniably, preparing to distance themselves from Donald Trump should he return to power in 2025, and explore what these shifts signify for the international community. Number 10 is Germany. Have you ever sensed that someone who has been your closest companion for decades is gradually pulling away? That uncomfortable silence, the postponed responses, the distinct cold shoulder. You perceive it, yet cannot definitively prove it. Now, envision that dynamic on an international scale. That's precisely the scenario unfolding with Germany. You might be taken aback by how significantly they have shifted. Once considered the cornerstone of the US-Europe partnership, Germany is now charting its own course in defense, developing a roadmap independent of Washington's direction. While NATO membership remains, the underlying tone has unmistakably changed. In fact, in early 2025, German officials openly supported calls for strategic autonomy, advocating for a Europe capable of standing on its own militarily. This push for self-reliance is not just rhetoric. It's backed by substantial actions. They are also investing billions in alternative energy collaborations, particularly with France and China, subtly reducing energy dependencies previously shared with the United States. Why this significant change? Because when Germany observed the US retracting from global commitments, they chose not to wait passively. They proactively planned for a different future. While it might not be immediately obvious on the surface, Germany has already begun navigating this new path, moving towards greater self-sufficiency and diversified alliances. This strategic recalibration reflects a deeper assessment of global uncertainties and a determination to secure German and European interests in a rapidly evolving world order. The implications of this shift are profound, potentially reshaping transatlantic relations and the balance of power within Europe itself. The quiet moves being made today could lead to very loud consequences tomorrow. Remember to watch until the very end, as we'll be consolidating these points and offering our conclusions on what this all means for the future of global politics. Number 9 is France. What course of action do you take when the very foundation beneath you seems to tremble? Some individuals freeze, paralyzed by uncertainty, while others instinctively flee. But France? France reacted by constructing its own platform. As the United States navigates through abrupt changes in foreign policy, seemingly shifting stances with frequency, France has established its own set of guidelines. President Macron's administration recently characterized America's tariff strategies as persistent economic tremors that show no sign of ceasing. One might assume that allies would maintain alignment, but reality presents a different picture. France is currently spearheading efforts to establish a distinct European defense force. This initiative goes beyond merely reforming NATO. It potentially aims to supplant its role entirely in certain aspects of European security. Consider the trade dimension. France has actively forged new bilateral agreements with nations across Africa, India, and Brazil, significantly expanding its economic network beyond traditional partners. In a striking move in March 2025, they finalized a €12 billion technology agreement that deliberately circumvents established U.S. platforms. What's perhaps even more revealing is the palpable silence and distance observed between the French and American presidencies. Meetings that were once characterized by warmth and camaraderie are now reportedly marked by a formality bordering on frostiness, akin to a chilly Parisian winter. Does this indicate France is still following America's lead? The evidence strongly suggests otherwise. France is actively carving out a more independent path, prioritizing European strategic autonomy and diversifying its partnerships globally. This deliberate distancing reflects a fundamental reassessment of the transatlantic relationship and a commitment to building a Europe less reliant on American directives. The long-term consequences of this divergence are still unfolding, but the trajectory towards greater French and European self-determination seems increasingly clear. Number 8 is Ireland. What occurs when your most influential ally transforms into your most significant economic uncertainty? For a small yet globally interconnected nation, this question transcends theory. It becomes a daily reality. We are discussing Ireland, and the rapidity of change there might surprise you. This is a nation whose economy once heavily depended on U.S. trade, particularly in the crucial sectors of pharmaceuticals and technology. Historically, any economic disturbance in Washington would inevitably send shockwaves through Dublin. However, the landscape of 2025 presents a starkly different scenario. Following President Trump's announcement of another potential round of global tariffs, this time specifically targeting the pharmaceutical industry, a cornerstone of the Irish economy, Ireland didn't succumb to panic. Instead, it pivoted strategically. With over €100 billion in pharmaceutical exports potentially at risk, Irish officials immediately initiated back-channel discussions with European Union partners and explored alternative Asian markets. These quiet conversations are evolving into tangible realignments. Why this shift? Because when you recognize that your primary economic driver could be the next target in a global trade conflict, you don't passively wait for the impact. Ireland proactively sought alternatives. But what's perhaps even more surprising is the shift in public sentiment. Irish citizens, traditionally holding pro-American views, are now expressing doubts about the long-term stability of the relationship. Recent polls indicate a 14% decline in favorable opinions towards U.S. leadership since January 2025. This isn't merely a statistical dip, it's a significant warning signal, and this sentiment extends beyond trade. Defense cooperation is also undergoing a transformation. While Ireland is not a NATO member, its enhanced collaboration with EU security initiatives signals a clear intention to build resilience from within Europe, rather than relying solely on external partners. The trust and the predictability of American diplomatic and economic policy has demonstrably eroded. And once that trust diminishes, nations, like individuals, begin to secure their own interests more cautiously. Are you still convinced Ireland is leaning solely on America? They are not leaning. They are learning and adapting to a new global reality. Number 7 is Portugal. When the gales of global uncertainty begin to blow, some nations hastily seek cover, hoping to weather the storm. But others? They commence constructing their own lighthouses, beacons to navigate the turbulent waters. This latter approach aptly describes the current strategy of Portugal. You might find it hard to believe how discreetly this nation has maneuvered away from the traditional sphere of U.S. influence. In early 2025, Portuguese defense officials astonished analysts by publicly evaluating European-manufactured fighter jets as a viable alternative to the American F-35s. This consideration wasn't primarily driven by cost comparison. It was fundamentally about confidence. Confidence in forging a future less tethered to Washington's fluctuating policy positions. Portugal has historically championed diplomacy and robust transatlantic cooperation. However, in recent months, even its characteristic patience seems to have thinned. The nation is actively recalibrating its foreign policy, placing a stronger emphasis on southern alliances. Renewed trade negotiations are underway across Africa and Latin America, regions the U.S. hasn't consistently prioritized in recent years. Lisbon also recently convened a closed-door summit involving several EU nations. A central and telling topic on the agenda was contingency planning. What steps should be taken if U.S. support for NATO becomes conditional once more? This is not standard diplomatic procedure. This is proactive preparation for a potentially altered geopolitical landscape. Furthermore, Portugal's newly established Tech Innovation Fund, valued at over 2.5 billion euros, is strategically directing investments towards projects explicitly designed to avoid dependence on American technological platforms. This includes advancements in cloud systems, artificial intelligence integration, and even green infrastructure initiatives. All these developments are being pursued with the goal of functioning independently of a Made in USA requirement. Yet the most striking aspect might be the subtlety of these maneuvers. Most of this strategic repositioning is occurring without significant fanfare or major headlines, just quiet shifts, like a guest departing a gathering discreetly before the atmosphere turns potentially awkward. Do you still perceive Portugal as simply following the broader European trend? Reconsider. Portugal is meticulously charting its own independent course. Number 6 is Switzerland. You recognize a fundamental shift is occurring when even the most famously neutral participant begins to subtly choose a side. It's akin to observing someone who consistently avoids conflict suddenly stepping forward and making their position known, albeit quietly. That's precisely the dynamic playing out with Switzerland, and you might be surprised by the increasing boldness of their actions. For many decades, Switzerland maintained a position of quiet neutrality, nestled between the world's major powers, concentrating on banking, diplomacy, and deliberately staying out of international disputes. But in 2025, that long-standing silence was broken with a decisive rejection of a proposed U.S. free trade agreement. Why this refusal? Because Swiss lawmakers, notably from the Social Democratic Party, expressed concerns that the U.S. was attempting to fragment European unity through economic pressure tactics, such as tariffs. This isn't mere speculation. It's documented in parliamentary debates. In February, a significant parliamentary committee explicitly cited the potential return of aggressive U.S. trade policies under Trump as a direct threat to European cohesion, leading them to halt the negotiations. Consider the implications. A nation renowned for its neutrality declining economic ties not primarily due to economic factors, but based on strategic concerns about maintaining European solidarity. But perhaps the most surprising development is Switzerland's proactive engagement towards Europe. For the first time in years, Bern is actively pursuing closer economic harmonization with the European Union. This includes revisiting discussions about aligning Swiss digital standards with EU frameworks, a move away from reliance on American systems. And this shift extends beyond policy. It reflects public sentiment. Polls from early 2025 reveal that 68% of Swiss citizens now favor closer cooperation with the EU bloc, a notable increase from previous years. The trust that once underpinned U.S.-Swiss economic diplomacy is visibly diminishing, and it isn't being readily replaced. One might assume a neutral country would avoid making significant geopolitical waves, but Switzerland's quiet departure from its traditional stance speaks volumes. The silence is over. Number 5 is Belgium. Occasionally, the very core of Europe begins to pulse to an entirely new beat. And if you aren't paying close attention, you risk missing the crucial warning signs. Take a closer look at Belgium. This nation isn't just another European country. It serves as the headquarters for NATO, the nerve center for countless European Union operations, and historically, a steadfast proponent of the Transatlantic alliance. Yet in 2025, this long-held belief is facing unprecedented tests. In January, Belgian leaders publicly voiced apprehension regarding whether the United States would continue to be a reliable guarantor of European defense. This wasn't mere diplomatic posturing. It signaled a nation preparing for the contingency that established alliances might not be as steadfast as previously assumed. Behind closed doors, Belgian officials have been actively exploring avenues to transition more defense infrastructure under EU-led initiatives, deliberately reducing reliance on Washington's next move. Furthermore, Belgium's economy, which thrives on trade with the U.S., especially in chemicals and aerospace, is showing signs of strategic diversification. Since the most recent threats of U.S. tariffs emerged, Belgian exporters have started rerouting logistics pathways towards Asia and the Middle East, accelerating diversification efforts. These are quiet adjustments with potentially significant long-term impacts. But here's what might truly capture your attention. Internal polling conducted in March 2025 indicated that only 39% of Belgians still trust the U.S. to consistently support Europe's defense over the next decade. That represents a dramatic decline from just 3 years prior, a shift that fundamentally alters the relationship's dynamics. Belgium isn't panicking, it's preparing. This preparation stems not from hostility, but from a pragmatic assessment of the current geopolitical reality. Because when the foundational pillars of an alliance begin to show signs of instability, even the most loyal partners start identifying alternative routes and emergency exits. Do you still believe Belgium is fully committed to the transatlantic dream without reservation? Perhaps not anymore. Number 4 is Denmark. Some nations amplify their voices when international tensions escalate. Others, however, make their moves in quietude, leaving observers to decipher their intentions. Lately, one small nation has transitioned from cautious observation to decisive action. That nation is Denmark, and you might be astonished by the extent of its strategic shift in 2025, as it seeks to build its future less dependent on the American sphere of influence. Just last month, Danish officials put forth a comprehensive policy initiative aimed at increasing defense spending by 1.2% of GDP. But here's the significant detail. None of this increased funding is earmarked for U.S.-led defense projects. Instead, these resources are being channeled directly into joint Nordic and EU strategic operations. What prompted this change? It boils down to consistency. After years of experiencing fluctuating U.S. policy stances on critical issues like climate change, international trade, and collective defense, Copenhagen has started to question the long-term reliability of U.S. alignment as a secure foundation. And they are not alone in this assessment. Internal reports from the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs reveal growing concern over strategic unpredictability, particularly in scenarios where Europe might need to act without immediate U.S. support. This concern isn't merely theoretical, it's driving tangible policy changes. In March 2025, Denmark surprised many by fast-tracking an AI infrastructure bill specifically designed to foster partnerships with European and Asian tech ecosystems, effectively bypassing traditional American platforms like Google Cloud and AWS. This isn't just a matter of technological preference, it's a strategic statement. Perhaps the most telling indicator, however, comes directly from the Danish populace. Recent surveys show that only 42% of Danes now trust the U.S. to consistently protect European interests. This figure represents the lowest level of trust recorded since 2003. Consider the gravity of this shift. A nation that once firmly embraced transatlantic loyalty is now looking inward towards regional cooperation and eastward towards new partnerships. The next time someone suggests Denmark is merely playing it safe, remind them that the definition of safety looks remarkably different in the geopolitical landscape of 2025. Number 3 is Estonia. When your immediate neighbor is a global superpower with a documented history of aggression, your approach to international relations transcends mere politics. It becomes a matter of national survival. This is the operational mindset of a nation that has evolved into one of the most strategically vigilant countries in Europe. We're referring to Estonia. But even here, in this frontline state, confidence in American steadfastness is not what it once was. Estonia has historically been one of the most vocally pro-American countries in Eastern Europe, especially concerning defense matters. However, in 2025, a subtle but significant shift is underway, rooted in apprehension. Estonian leaders recently initiated measures to significantly boost local defense production. This move isn't solely about achieving self-reliance. It's driven by the concern, explicitly stated in their own internal assessments, that Washington's reliability can no longer be unconditionally guaranteed. This stark evaluation comes directly from a classified Estonian National Security Committee memo that was leaked in February. The bluntness of the language used in the memo is noteworthy, and the strategic realignment becomes even clearer. Estonia is actively collaborating behind the scenes with Finland, Latvia, and Poland to establish a Baltic-led rapid response force. This force is being designed to operate effectively, with or without direct NATO or US support. This isn't a contingency plan. It represents the creation of a new operational framework. Technologically, Estonia is also making quiet moves to distance itself from US platforms. The nation recently signed a cybersecurity defense agreement with Japan and Germany, establishing what one analyst described as a firewall without a US plug. For a nation previously subjected to massive cyber attacks, this move is not symbolic. It's a crucial step towards independent survival. Yet, perhaps the most startling development involves public opinion. In a country where pro-American sentiment has traditionally been exceptionally high, support for relying fully on US military dependency has decreased by 19% since the beginning of the year. The population isn't becoming anti-American. Rather, they are becoming increasingly cautious. Estonia continues to value its partnership with the US, but in the current geopolitical climate of 2025, that friendship is now unequivocally coupled with a robust Plan B. Number 2 is Poland. There exists a critical distinction between standing in solidarity with someone and standing deserted when they fail to appear. In the year 2025, one of America's historically closest allies is beginning to seriously contemplate this difference. That nation is Poland. For years, Poland has been among the most fervent supporters of a strong US military presence in Europe. In fact, it has hosted thousands of American troops, consistently praised NATO cooperation, and even designated military bases in honor of former US presidents. However, lately, the tone emanating from Warsaw has discernibly shifted. Beneath the surface of continued loyalty, a growing sense of urgency and quiet frustration is palpable. In early 2025, Polish leaders sanctioned a €14 billion expansion of domestic weapons manufacturing, effectively doubling down on national independence. You might be shocked to learn what insiders are terming this strategy: strategic insurance against potential Washington disengagement. This isn't merely about defense enhancement. It's about preparing for the possibility of silence from across the Atlantic. Even in the realm of trade, Poland is strategically distancing itself from over-reliance. Following new energy agreements signed with Norway and South Korea this year, the country is signaling a long-term pivot towards diversified security and economic strategies. And consider the perspective of the Polish people. Polls conducted in April 2025 revealed that while 65% of Poles still value U.S. relations, nearly half believe Europe must prepare for a future where American support might be unreliable or entirely absent. This marks a stunning shift in public mindset for one of Washington's most steadfast allies. Poland hasn't severed ties, but it's no longer clinging solely to them. It is constructing something more resilient: self-reliance. This strategic repositioning underscores a profound reassessment of the transatlantic relationship, driven by a perceived need for greater autonomy in an increasingly uncertain world. Number 1 is the United Kingdom. What measures do you take when your long-standing partner repeatedly alters the established rules of engagement? For one particular nation, the answer is straightforward. Begin authoring your own rulebook. That nation is the United Kingdom. You might be shocked at the quiet intensity with which it's reshaping its global strategy in 2025. This is a country that once proudly proclaimed the special relationship. Yet this year, that term is seldom heard. Why the change? Because following Brexit, after years of navigating shifting U.S. foreign policies, and amidst growing uncertainty surrounding NATO's future trajectory, Britain is actively hedging its bets. In March, the UK initiated the AUKUS 5 Economic Alliance, a financial and technological pact involving Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Japan. Notice who is conspicuously absent from this core group. Indeed, the United States was not invited to lead this particular initiative. This isn't just a minor policy adjustment. It signifies a fundamental directional shift. Meanwhile, the UK's Defence White Paper, released earlier this year, detailed a reduced reliance on US military logistics, favoring instead expanded deployments in the Indo-Pacific region. And the strategic recalibration doesn't end there. British intelligence agencies are concurrently developing new secure communication and data systems designed to operate independently, no longer defaulting to American infrastructure. But perhaps the most telling evidence lies within the dialogues occurring inside Parliament. Lawmakers from across the political spectrum are increasingly employing phrases such as global agility and post-Atlantic strategy. A decade ago, such terminology would have sounded almost seditious. Today, it reflects established policy. And what about public opinion? A recent survey revealed that only 38% of Britons currently trust the prevailing U.S. administration to act in Britain's best interest. For a country that stood shoulder to shoulder with America in every major 21st century conflict, this represents a staggering emotional detachment. The UK isn't cutting ties, but it's also decisively stopped looking solely backward. It is stepping forward, forging its own path in a changing world. Europe is transforming, quietly, strategically, and more rapidly than many realize. From Ireland to the UK, Germany to Estonia, nations once inextricably linked to Washington are now constructing their own futures, sometimes in parallel with the US, and sometimes distinctly apart. So, what conclusions can we draw from these observations? The geopolitical landscape is undergoing a significant, albeit often subtle, transformation. The traditional Atlantic alliance, while still formally intact, is showing undeniable signs of strain and realignment. European nations, ranging from major powers like Germany and France to strategically vital countries like Poland and Estonia, are increasingly prioritizing strategic autonomy. This shift is driven by a confluence of factors: perceived unpredictability in U.S. foreign policy, the economic pressures of potential trade disputes and tariffs, and a growing sense that Europe must be prepared to manage its security and economic interests more independently. We see this manifest in various ways. Explicit calls for strategic autonomy, the establishment of European-led defense initiatives potentially parallel or even alternative to NATO structures, significant investments in domestic defense production, diversification of trade partnerships away from sole reliance on the U.S. towards Asia, Africa, Latin America, development of independent technological infrastructure, bypassing U.S. platforms, and shifts in public opinion reflecting decreased trust in U.S. reliability. Even historically neutral countries like Switzerland and staunch transatlantic allies like the UK and Ireland are hedging their bets, forging new regional or global partnerships, and recalibrating their foreign policy postures. This isn't necessarily about hostility towards the U.S., but rather a pragmatic response to a perceived change in the global order and a desire for greater resilience and self-determination. The quiet exits and silent shifts observed across these 10 nations suggest a fundamental reassessment of the post-World War II order. While the full implications are yet to unfold, it's clear that Europe in 2025 is actively preparing for a future where it may need to stand more firmly on its own feet, shaping a new balance of power both within the continent and on the global stage. The era of unquestioned American leadership within the alliance appears to be evolving into a more multipolar dynamic, with potentially profound consequences for international relations in the coming years.